For Great Gatsby by Fitzgerald, I decided to analyze the theme of isolation. Here is my thematic thesis, which I think that Fitzgerald is trying to communicate this by using the theme of isolation. Isolation guides people down a delusional path and allows for them to separate themselves from others, which eventually leads to their own self-destruction. Now for my quotes. Quote 1. After Daisy and Gatsby were separated, Gatsby led a life of isolation due to his desire for Daisy. He became obsessed with trying to get her back, which led to him not living in the present. For the entirety of the book, he is stuck in the past and cannot get over his life with Daisy. Rather than focusing on reality, he is living in his oasis of memories that he had of his relationship with Daisy before. He cannot accept that the past is the past, and this leads to him isolating himself from the real world. He dedicates his life and tries inexplicably hard to catch his past, to bring it back into the light again. However, Gatsby cannot grasp it, for it is unattainable no matter what he does. The fantasy he created and lived for made him separate himself from others. In the end, living in the past is what ultimately led to his demise, for if he didn't live in his dreams, he never would have died so young. Quote 2. In this scene, Daisy is drunk and screaming that she has changed her mind about marrying Tom. She does not want to marry him, but in the end, she does so for her reputation. After that hectic scene, she reserves herself and does not drink any alcohol. She sets herself apart from others because she does not want anyone to know her true thoughts for the sake of her precious reputation. She holds her tongue and isolates herself to her thoughts and culture. She puts on a persona and retaliates from saying anything she wants due to her desire for wealth and being in the higher class. She does not want anyone to know what she truly thinks or who she truly is. As a result of her confining her personality and locking up tight, she becomes very secluded. However, that leads to her not expressing herself, which ends up having her be in a toxic relationship with an abusive husband who cheats on her every day. Quote 3. Nick intentionally stays away from people. When he goes to Gatsby's party, there are a ton of people there, and yet he chooses to go to the bar. He socially isolates himself because he does not want to interact with other people. He says that he does not look alone, but in all actuality, he is. He remains at the bar for a while and barely talks to anybody. In that moment, he is a lone man who has absolutely no purpose. He is not included in things and does not make himself included. He watches instead of interacts. Quote 4. This really shows how lonely Gatsby was. Due to him living in fantasies, he did not interact with other people. He threw a ton of parties and did not make one friend. At his funeral, nobody came. Nobody cared that he was dead. Gatsby chose to pursue his life in the past, and that is what made him so alone throughout life. No matter what he did, no one cared because he lived in a fantasy. Quote 5. Daisy cuts herself from other people because she only cares about her class. She wants to keep her reputation and wealth, so she completely secludes herself. Even if she did truly love Gatsby, she still chose Tom because he was a part of the higher class. She detaches herself from everyone so she can be a part of the wealthy. She always abandons something for the higher class. In this way, she is isolated because she strictly confines herself to her culture. Quote 6. Nick realized that he was the only person who cared for Gatsby in the end. He finally appreciated Gatsby for who he was, but realized that he was the only one. It was a shock because Nick had been a watcher. He was always with Gatsby, watching and acting as a third wheel. However, in the time he spent acting as a third wheel, Nick fell in love with the idea of Gatsby and grew a bond that he thought he shared with Gatsby's friends, such as Daisy. However, after Gatsby's death, he came to the conclusion that he was the only one mourning them. Nick was isolated, being the only person left on Gatsby's side, which led to his devastation. Now, here is a poem I created. I titled it The Path to Isolation. Can't repeat the past. Why, of course you can, say careless people, looking around wildly as if the past were lurking in the shadow just out of reach. It's a great disadvantage to hold your tongue, say careless people, looking purposeless and alone. Carelessness is vast. I asked myself if I was responsible for the carelessness. It grew upon me that I was. I did it to myself. I found myself alone and smashed up. I cried and I cried, but nobody came. No one was interested. From the first two parts of my poem, it is conveying that people are being reckless with their lives. The first part shows how people believe that they can bring the past to the present without any consequences. They think that they are so close to reaching their dreams, but they are actually far away. The second part shows how keeping everything bottled inside, not letting anything go off from your mind, or staying quiet all the time, does not go without its consequences either. In the middle of my poem, I wanted to convey that their actions were acts of isolation, and it led to their destruction. People in this book made reckless decisions to not be themselves, therefore imprisoning themselves in the personas they created. They were responsible for it. This later on led to their destruction, which is illustrated through the last points of my poem. The person was alone, shattered, and was crying for someone, but nobody came, nor were they interested. The person was left all alone, with not a single person to help them. Now, on to connotations. First one, isolation. Isolation, we mainly associate it with solitude, loneliness, lone, and in this book it is very much present. All three characters isolate themselves, which make them lonelier than ever. For example, Nick intentionally does not interact with anybody. Daisy only interacts with people in her culture, and Gatsby is consumed by his delusions. Emptiness. When people think of emptiness, they mostly think of a void, vacancy, hollowness. Throughout the book, Gatsby has a deep void for Daisy. It leads him to live in a fantasy world, which in turn it makes him put on a facade so everyone will like him. He finds out that he is truly abandoned when Daisy turns off her lights, indicating that she does not need him anymore. Lurking. When people think of lurking, they think of hidden and secret. While Daisy intentionally reserves herself, she isolates herself by hiding her personality and keeping her thoughts secrets. She does not want people to get too close to her, so she imprisons herself. Purposeless. Other words for this can be known as hopeless, no point in life, useless. Gatsby desired Daisy and wanted the rich life. He worked his entire life to achieve both of them, not realizing that it was hopeless. They were unattainable. All of his efforts were useless, for his dreams were impossible to achieve. And that's how he ended up dying. Smashed. Smash can have many different meanings, but the main meaning associated with this book is broken, shattered, destroyed. After Gatsby's death, Nick is completely shattered. He realizes the truth of life and is broken because of it, leaving him alone and with his thoughts. Nobody. Not important, inessential, a loser. Gatsby was seen as a nobody. He was poor before, and no one thought that he was important. He was considered a loser to all of them, which in turn made Gatsby want his dreams even more and made him try even harder, which then also led up to him dying because he wanted everything. Shadow. When people think of shadows, they think of darkness, gloomy, a cover. Well, Daisy's charming personality is all a cover for her true personality. In all actuality, she is filled with darkness, but conceals that part of her. She completely confines it. Abandoned. When people think of abandoned, think of rejected, deserted, neglected, and forgotten. Gatsby is forgotten and rejected by Daisy. He is also forgotten by everybody else, which is seen through his funeral. Even though he is rich, he is still neglected from everybody, showing that he truly is isolated from society. And then Daisy feels deserted by her husband because he is constantly leaving her for other women. This makes her feel an abandoned feeling. And then Nick is constantly neglected throughout the whole book by everyone. There is one point where everybody forgets about Nick and he just wants to leave. The character I chose for my theme is Gatsby. By far, he was the most isolated person in the book, and he paid for it in the end. This quote shows how important the green light is to Gatsby. The green light on the other side of the water represents all of Gatsby's dreams. It represents the distance between him and Daisy and his want to be accepted into the high class. He could never find anyone to replace Daisy, so instead he isolated himself. He has these huge parties but watches them instead of interacting with the people. The only way for Gatsby to not be alone was for him to be with Daisy. However, his desire for her and wealth led him to be one of the most alone men ever, which would result in his death later on. Symbolism. In this picture here, we can see that Gatsby is standing on his house. It's all dirty from a party, and he's just looking at Daisy's house at the green light. He is lusting for her. He wants her so badly, and you can even see that he's carrying a daisy in his hand. I think that this really symbolizes the idea of isolation, because nobody is by him, even though the party was huge, and yet all he can think about is Daisy and his past with her, and that's all he's thinking about. And so I think that really captured the idea that he truly is isolated from society, because he wants Daisy and his past to be in the present again. The end.